if you could just start by giving them a brief background of that would be great.
Yeah, of course. So, good morning, everybody. It's really lovely to be here, and it's good to kind of at least virtually meet you all. I can see some of your faces, but there's quite a few of you. So, yeah. So I'm Kirsty Jarvis. I'm founder and CEO of Luminous PR. Luminous is a tech PR agency, but as PR has kind of developed over the sort of 20 years that I've been doing it, really, we're sort of moving a lot into lots of different varieties of PR, including personal communications and personal branding, etc., as we go along. So Luminous has got a real specialism working with obviously tech businesses, but that can be of all sizes. So we have got some quite big companies that we work with, but also really crucially, we do a lot of work, and where my heart really is working with very early stage startup businesses that are really kind of in the I don't think this is a word that's liked so much, but in the hustle stage, I like to kind of call it at the moment. So where you're doing a bit of everything, and that's where my team I think really comes into its own, because we've got a really super senior team, and we've been doing this long enough to know that it's really tough being a founder, and there's a lot of hoops and things that you have to juggle. So my business has kind of become a bit of a partner and a real specialist in that space as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kirsty. So I think that's a perfect lead into our first question. So you've obviously worked with hundreds of founders. What makes the founder stand out from a communications or PR perspective?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've seen a lot, both from kind of a one-on-one standpoint, but also, people that are doing speaking and obviously quite prolific in terms of what they're doing communications, whether that's from PR or from content generation. And I think one of the things, and I'm sure most of us will kind of resonate with this. For me, I think, the ones that stand out the most are the ones that are pretty authentic to who they are, and also to the proposition that they're putting together. So super knowledgeable, and can talk confidently and with authority, which actually, when you're a first time founder or you're sort of a new founder, that can take quite a lot of confidence to do. And it requires quite a lot of preparation. But I think that sort of, you obviously have a lot of knowledge as a founder, otherwise you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. But being able to sort of drive that message forward with authority and with kind of a very strong and concise opinion. Um, those are the ones that always sort of, for me, they're the ones that really make me take notice of what they're saying, and they leave a lasting impression on me. But I think the other ones that, thinking about it from a slightly a different standpoint, is also the ones that show really strong leadership. And we'll talk, I think, a little bit more about this as we go through the questions, because I do think that this is a really, really important part of the founder profile. And the ones that you can see from what they're putting out there that there would be really good leaders and actually people that are really great to work for.
Awesome. And how much do you think about a founder's brand being different from their company's brand?
Yeah, so I mean, it should be different, but I think it really does also depend on the size of the business and where you are in your journey. So I think right at the beginning of a startup's journey, typically the founder is the brand. That is the thing that that it's the face. They're the face of the business. They are the biggest advocate. There is no one more passionate about their business, and that typically they come hand in hand. They're kind of generally intertwined at the early stages. Um, but actually, thinking about it, if you think about what a brand is trying to do as a kind of entity, really its main focus is about appealing to target customers and helping that brand with growth. Whereas actually, if you think about the founder and the founder profile, they have to appeal to a variety of different stakeholders. So that could be inspiring their team, it could be attracting new partners, it could be trying to raise money, and of course there is the customers as part of that. So if you think about where a brand communication strategy will be about that kind of real targeting the customers and helping people sort of understand where you differentiate and why your proposition is really there, actually the founders have a number of different sort of strands of people that they have to try and inspire that confidence in. So it does have to be really different, I think, even from an early stage. And thinking about those figureheads of the business need to be really personal. They need to show that leadership, show strength, and all of those really important qualities, which either through the investment journey or whether you're trying, you may have raised money and you need to suddenly hire 50 new people. That is quite an important strategic tactic that the founder has to try and navigate. But I think just on the subject of personal brand, I think this term gets kind of bandied around quite a lot, and I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. Because the moment I start saying the words, I think, to a client, I think you need to do a bit more on your personal brand, you can almost see there's such a huge number of founders that go, oh, this is so creepy. I really hate this. I don't feel like this is it. And I think it's because there's a misunderstanding that people have, which is it's about they feel uncomfortable raising their own profile for purposes of like getting their next speaking gig or perhaps getting themselves ready for their next opportunity. And we've all seen it, like people are out there that are trying to kind of become almost influencers in their own space. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. But I think I prefer the term founder brand as personal brand, because this, I think, better encapsulates that it's not just about building the individual's profile, but it's about what can the founder profile do for the business. The motivation, I think, gets a little bit lost sometimes within that term of personal branding. And I think it's really important that founders get comfortable with the difference between the two, because one is purely about driving growth and the other is about raising their own profiles, and they're kind of a little bit linked. But I think sometimes I find that founders, they feel a bit more comfortable when they think about they're doing it for their business.
And when they're just starting out and those two are more closely aligned, how do you guide founders on kind of like what should they focus more on first when it's like day zero or day one of their business of building the founder brand and the company brand?
Yeah, I mean, it is finding that balance is really hard, and I think you do tend to get a bit more of a gut feel for this as you go along throughout your journey. At the very early stage, again, I think the two are very intertwined, because the founder, if you're trying to raise your first raise or you're trying to get your first customers, you've got to think that people are doing their due diligence on you as well as the brand. I mean, in a way, the brand doesn't really have any presence at the beginning, so you are that person. So I think finding at the beginning, it's probably a real kind of 50-50 split. But however, once that kind of brand starts to grow and the validation of the brand is starting to kind of move in its direction, that's when it typically starts to split. The problem is, I find, is that the founder's voice typically gets quieter as the business grows. And there's so many reasons for this. And I think some of them are really, I think everybody, I mean, I'm a founder, I know what it's like. And I should say at the beginning that is kind of do as I say, not as I do, because I do struggle. I know how hard this is to do it. But lack of time is the most common thing that means that balance is often shifted. So at the beginning, you have, you're a small business. As the business starts to kind of gain momentum and the hats that you have to wear become more, that founder voice becomes quieter, and then the brand typically has the majority of the communications. And I think what I'm trying to do with my clients and trying to kind of get the message out there, that even if you only have 15 minutes, what can you do that is tactical and strategic? And but if you can make sure that right from the beginning, it's a discipline that you carve yourself out some time each week to do some of that, I think that's really super valuable for you.
And in that, do you have any areas of focus if they only have 15 minutes a day? Like, what are some quick, high impact wins that they can focus on?
Well, I always like to think when you're doing something communications wise, it's how many kind of tick boxes can you get in one hit. So I think try and find ways to talk about your growth and your personal experience of that growth in an insightful and thought-provoking way, because the message of growth is important. Investors want to see that you're growing. People want to work with people that are successful. So that's really important. But also by sharing your insight and your knowledge as part of that, you're also showing yourself as an authority and you're delivering some expertise. So it's like how many within one post, think about how many different kind of tick boxes you can get within that. And then I think one of the other things that I think is really important, and we see this a lot actually, where it's almost like founders get panicked and they're like, I have to do something, so I'm just going to post something. And they need to kind of, these comms needs to have the precision of an arrowhead in a way. Like, everything you do has to be pointing towards a direction or delivering something of value to the business. So like kind of the pithy things that you tend to see with, where you kind of look at it and go, okay, it's nice, but I don't really see the purpose of that. That is kind of a complete waste of time. So try and align all the efforts you have with communication with where your business needs your voice to be heard the most. So if you need good team, think about what you can show that shows yourself as a good leader or someone that's great to work with, or the business has a great culture. And tackle it. If it's week by week, think about what you absolutely have to do this week, and then what could you say that maybe tries to make that happen.
Awesome. And kind of on that note, how much of this should be planned versus spontaneous, something that comes up in the day, and how do you keep the authenticity, but also, make sure you're being consistent with your presence?
Yeah. So most founders will plan their stuff because they don't have the time. And consistency is almost more important, I think, than trying to be really authentic or in the moment. So I think, if you are really, really time poor, be consistent. But what can help with that is having an underlying messaging framework. So something that you've designed right from the beginning that kind of helps you, like if you've got a small amount of time and you need to plan a lot of content, what are the things that you can and should be saying where the business is needed at the moment? But if you do have that time, it is super powerful to think about doing that in the moment, engaging and sharing. Because it can bring in the real, some great results, and it can also start to build community and, and your own sort of engagement rates up as well. So, I think we have to be realistic. The consistent plan stuff is where most people are going to see that value. But then if you get 5 minutes on the train or something, then just pick something and don't be afraid to engage.
And in terms of platforms, do you have a recommended platform or social media platform that founders should be focused on mainly?
Again, I think you've got to look at what you're trying to do with your comms, and then pick your platform. From a B2B perspective, I still don't think you can beat LinkedIn, although LinkedIn is getting super noisy at the moment, really, really noisy, and it's really hard to cut through. But I think, if you're doing it right and you've got some really good compelling things to say, LinkedIn is probably where you need to be. But thinking if you have a consumer proposition, then obviously some of these platforms like TikTok and Instagram are still very much there. But I think thinking again about being time poor, if you've only got time to do one well, pick the one that is going to give you that best bang for your buck, so to speak, or where your typical audience hangs out. But it's unfortunately social media is one of those things that we can't ignore. Talent will research you on it, investors will stalk you on it. We even see like journalists now, before making decisions on whether they're going to use you as a profile, will look at what you're doing, not only in the wider world but on things like LinkedIn, and that is still very much the preferred channel at the moment for business connections.
And I think this is a great segue into our next question. So, where do you see founders most underutilizing their voice or that founder's brand when it comes to driving business outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, most founders, we are pretty silent actually. So I think they when we talk about underutilizing their voice, it's once the business has become big enough for an internal marketing team, there's almost like this kind of sigh of relief. Thank goodness I don't have to do anything on this now. It's all in hands. I don't have to do anything. So I think the silence, I think, is the biggest problem, where the founder just goes buried in building new tech or driving the business forward. I think one of the things that there's also kind of laziness, I think, with founders a little bit. And again, I'm not blaming anyone for this, but because again, I have done the same thing. But it's where you're just kind of sharing company posts with no real founder opinion or context to it. So you kind of, that sort of reshare or those sorts of, really easy kind of wins. Lack of empathy, or showing that they don't really understand, or not putting posts out there that kind of give that real opportunity to show that they understand their customers. So if you, let's say you're sharing a case study on LinkedIn, or you've got maybe a report that you're working through, what would you as a founder want to say that really shows that you are an authority on that sector or that industry or that particular challenge? Typically, again, because they're time poor, it's just a quick share, and then there's no real, well, I don't really know what's the why behind this, what's important about this. The founder is like really kind of perfectly positioned to be able to do that. So showing some empathy, I think, is a great way of attracting new businesses in to work with you. And then we've had a couple of opportunities certainly in the last few months where we've had working with businesses that are going through times of change. So whether they've made an acquisition, or they're really struggling with what they're doing, the founder at that point needs to be more vocal than ever, to calm that kind of any negative public perception. And again, typically, because they're in the weeds of what's happening, they forget to kind of come out and almost put some sort of thinking about what might the outside world be thinking of them or the business. So I think that's, their voice is more important than ever. I mean, you have to look at the recent Marks and Spencer's story that was out last week with the the cyber attack, and the CEO of Marks and Spencer's was quite prolific and came out with, I thought, was quite a good statement. Obviously, the business has gone through a really tough time, and I think will continue to. But I think it just gives that confidence when the founder is there at the front. There's someone that's got this. There's someone that is explaining to us as the customer or the outside world what is going on.
Awesome. And then maybe on the other end of the spectrum, where do you see founders making mistakes when they're trying to be maybe too vocal or visible?
Being too salesy, I think, actually I think that is not that's something that the brand, I think, has the luxury of doing. But actually the founder, if you want to build really good connections with people, it's more about that authority and expertise rather than this is our proposition and this is what we do and this is why it's amazing. So I think being too salesy for founders doesn't work particularly well. um Again, I think we talked a little bit about this earlier, but sort of very random seeming posts, so things that are kind of a bit of oversharing but for no reason at all. I think there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable. I want to make that really clear. Actually, I think some of the most powerful posts are when someone has been vulnerable for the need of a purpose that they are looking to get an outcome for. But I think there's definitely too much at the moment of people that are just kind of randomly putting things out there, and it's kind of clogging up people's feeds ultimately. I mean, I feel that feels quite harsh, but I do feel where it's that busy, it doesn't really that doesn't really work very well. And then I think also, one of the biggest missed opportunities is where they have opportunities to collaborate with partners. So maybe you have a funding announcement, or maybe you've just signed a really high profile partner. They might think about a press release that they can do, or they might not. But what about the socials? Is there something that you could do collaboratively that helps with, leveraging their network, leveraging, their brand, which may be a bit further on with you? You've got a really great opportunity at these moments in time where you hit that kind of milestone. But again, it's probably because founders haven't got the time to see the wood for the trees, but it's a missed opportunity where they haven't had that opportunity to kind of collaborate, or they've planned it and made it easy for that to happen.
Yeah, that's a great way, I think, to make a post more unique and interesting. Are there any other tips you have for kind of cutting through the noise on LinkedIn when founders are posting?
I always like mixed media, so try not to just stick to the standard photos. Some of the best people that I've seen are using really nice visuals. They're really thinking about almost their own channel as a separate strategy. They might be using snippets of video from speaking engagements or things that they've done, which has really kind of packed home a message. So yeah, I think thinking about the mixed media element of that is quite compelling. There's also I think one of the things that always captures my attention is where you start a post or something with quite a punchy message, something that's maybe a little bit controversial, or that's how we pitch to media. You've got to capture people's attention. I think our ability to consume content these days, we get bored very easily because of how much is coming at us. So the thing that you really want to grab people's attention should be in your first paragraph, really. Whether it's an article or a comment that you're making, or you're trying to engage with a journalist, or if it's a post on LinkedIn. I think that kind of first punchy statement that you make is the thing that really grabs you.
Awesome. And in the days of, ChatGPT and AI, how do you see the role of the founder's voice evolving over the next 5 to 10 years with the noise and the platform fatigue that everyone's facing?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that Luminous has got a very, very keen eye on at the moment, because I don't know, I think that these channels are getting noisier, and there is a lot of content that seems the same. I think everyone's starting to sound the same. And I think it's because what's happening is that people are using AI generated content. They're perhaps not either prompting it in a way that help them make it unique, or they are just using it kind of just as a really quick fix. And that's fine for now. But what will happen is when everyone really does start to sound the same, it's going to be harder and harder for founders to stand out. That noise will become almost deafening, and then people will become very numb to it. So that competition isn't going to get any easier. So where I think founders will be smart, and I don't think it's going to even be in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to be pretty quickly. Founders are going to need to really spend time to think about the focus on their messaging strategies, and brand strategy as well. It's you're going to have to work harder than ever to think about where your differentiated voice comes from, what your competitors are doing, and where that little gap is in between what they're saying and what you're saying. Because if you don't, I think you're just going to get lost.
Can I jump in with a few questions?
Mm.
The first one being, as a start, or I like the term like founder brand rather than personal brand. When you're sitting down to like think about that for the first time, do you suggest that founders choose, like, I don't know, a couple words to define their founder brand, and like, I guess, like, what's the right way to think about how they want to be perceived?
Yeah, and it's quite an in-depth process, actually. This is a really good question, because I think the important thing, going back to that word authentic, is what do they stand for? What is the thing that's they're most passionate about, or that they're in, and then combine that with what the business needs, and then start from there. Um, Actually, just sitting down with a blank sheet of paper to work out what to write is one of the hardest things to do. But starting from the beginning, treating yourself a bit like how we would treat a client. So getting someone to perhaps ask them good questions about what is it that you think your customer really needs to hear right now, or what are the challenges that are keeping your customers up at night, what do we have that fits within that, where do we differentiate, and then all of those things you almost like kind of need to mind map all of the things that you want to say, and then start to pull it into sort of topics and themes and trends. And then and one of the really good tactics, I talked about the messaging framework, and that's actually quite a structured thing. It's all kind of in a spreadsheet, and it has messaging pillars, and then the different ways of saying things in for different people, and with substantiation. But then once you've got that, what we do is that we start to work with founders and help them. It's almost like a script. It's the things that, they know that they need to say. Where are those things that in any conversation, whether it's sitting in a lift with somebody going up, on the way to a meeting, or whether you're networking or whether you're doing a speaking engagement, it should just be part of your patter. But that initial messaging framework actually takes quite a lot of work, and sometimes needs people that can be quite impartial to ask you tough questions, and treat yourself a bit like a journalist would actually. Anything that feels it's a bit flaky or a bit like it's not got holes in it, how can you strengthen that? What could you get as a business to really help substantiate those opinions and viewpoints that you have?
We had a member of our community who has background in branding kindly come in and offer to do all that for us at Hotbed. And he went around and like asked us questions to members of our community, like, what's your interpretation of Hotbed? Like, what are the words that come to mind? And then forced us to answer those questions, as you said. And it was so useful, because even if you hear the questions that you just shared, like it does take someone else asking them to you to kind of get clarity on that, and then where you want to take your company's messaging from there. That's actually
Definitely.
a good
Yeah.
little partner activity we should maybe do with cohort.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, and of course, we're very conditioned as well. That kind of point I made about founders not being too salesy. It's fine to be salesy in a sales situation, but no one wants to be sold to, or you're not going to get that kind of traction or the visibility if you're trying to sell to people that don't really know you in a very public arena. So, but the problem is we get into a patter, like we all hear ourselves do it, where we're used to pitching to investors, we're used to pitching to customers, and that typically will filter down into your own personal voice. So trying to think about those ways that kind of keep it really unique and on point and helpful. I always think you try and be as useful as possible with anything that you put out, and that's a great way of kind of helping people to remember you actually as well.
For the founders who, like, let's say they're, I don't know, 12 months into their startup, have raised a little bit of money. This will be most of the founders in the cohort, raised a bit of money. They have an MVP or their full product is live in the market. They have some early traction, but still like everything feels quite new. And they're still, I guess, like working out the ins and outs of the product. Maybe they don't have loads to shout about right now, or they're perhaps have launched MVP and like are just getting in customer feedback. So they don't have loads to share on LinkedIn. What are great bits, or like what are great topics that they can be posting about that maybe they don't realize they could be posting about? Like what's existing content for them that might be overlooked?
So that word authority, and really building up their own authority. Look at what's happening in the news. What do they have? If it's something that's relevant to their industry, just taking a bit of time to think about what their opinion might be on that. How is it relevant to their potential customers? I think that's a great way of starting. Also, another thing that's really I've seen founders do really well with is, so if you've got a lot of founders tend to be in groups like this or accelerators, sharing content and having, being supportive of your network. I always think that comes back tenfold, because when you are ready to launch something, if you've been generous with your engagement, then they will be generous to you when you come back. So I think kind of giving to get is quite a nice thing to do. And the great thing about that with the news, and there's always stuff going on that you can have an opinion on. So it gives you something to share so that you're visible, even if you don't have, the kind of big moment for your business.
Makes sense. Yeah. Fiona, I'm going to call on you in just a second. Just as going to say too, and I'd love to hear like your thoughts on this. Anecdotally, and Leo, who's in this cohort and he's on this call. You came to mind, so I'm calling you out right now, Leo. But they're just launching their MVP and have a good wait list, but have posted so much content around the problem they're trying to solve, which is around women's health. And like, I just think that's such a great example of being an early stage startup and delivering so much content around the problem and like education, and have developed a great community off of that. So I think like that's something that comes to mind, where if you don't have anything personally to share, maybe you can like just do more education around
Yeah.
around the problem. So this is my last question, like what percentage of content do you recommend being around like education around the problem you're trying to solve, or around I don't know, maybe bits about the market that people don't know about? Like I guess if you were to give a sort of like pie chart, what percentage of your post should be around different topics, what would you say?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think 60% probably of your content should be helpful and insightful. And then the 20% should be about, your what's going on in the business, things that you're proud of potentially. And I think, but also I think it really does depend on what the business needs you to help it achieve in the next 3 to 6 months. So again, if you're going through a period where you really quickly need to hire developers, then perhaps most of your content should be about, your developer team or your developer team away day, or what it's like working for, or having case studies on your blog about people that are really enjoying working for you. It's those kind of things that you could maybe do more of. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but I do think that most of it should be about kind of being useful to the community.
Okay, thanks. All right, Fiona, we'll have you go first, and then Hong, go to you, and then we'll take some questions from the Zoom chat.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. I've been around an awful long time. I'm probably the oldest on this group. And back in the day, PR was about newspapers. It was about journalists. It was about having one of those one-to-ones. We did hire a PR agency last year. And I thought that was that person's role. He was going to get me to get journalists within certain trade publications or mass media to listen to me. But he ended up just doing my social content, or the business's social content. Well, my other business, my consultancy, that's what we do for a living for our clients, yeah? So how do has it all changed? Is there no longer this role that you guys, your industry plays, where you help me get because you've got the journalist contacts, where you help me get that position of authority with journalists? Or is it now all done through social? Is there no way I can actually get the correspondent of the so-and-so? And don't get me wrong, I've done it myself. I've reached out to them through LinkedIn, and we've been featured or talked about twice in this fantastic publication, because I did manage to get them engaged through LinkedIn. But is there not a model where the PR guys do that for us, through their contacts, through their network?
Yeah,
hey,
absolutely.
you really need to be listening to this. Yeah,
absolutely. And I can't comment on your experience with the PR, but I would say nowadays with startups, because what happens, Fiona, is that you might only have news at best every 3 months, but more likely probably every 6 months. So the bit in between that, if you're an agency that is, proactively working for your clients, the bit that you can control is what we call thought leadership. So it is sharing a comment and opinion. It's getting journalists and editors at the target publications where your customers read, to take up articles from you. And I would say, Amanda's on the call with me, I would say that's probably 75% of the work that we do, because otherwise we can't really, as PR people, justify our existence if we're not getting you that regular coverage every month.
that's right.
So it's definitely possible. Don't give up. It might be, I don't know, again, it's difficult without knowing the tactics that you were using. But it might just be that the tactics weren't hitting the spot, or maybe, I don't know. It's really difficult to kind of say, but all I will say is that we are doing that.
It's still expected. Brilliant. Yeah. So as a general rule of thumb, I would say that if I were to issue an RFP, it's expected that potentially around 75% of the agency's effort would be in that one-to-one relationship with the press.
Yeah, because
Brilliant. Thank you.
if you don't have news every week, what are the agency going to do? So it has to be like getting you forward, putting you forward, and so you having a comment on a wider news story, or you've got an idea for an article that would really speak to some of your customers. That's the kind of thing, and editors are really receptive to it because media has changed so much in the last 15 years that a lot of the journalists are now freelance. Editors are having to do a lot with a little, so they are really relying on PR people to help connect them with real experts.
Brilliant.
So yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn. I've seen your profile. I'd love a conversation afterwards because we are going through that process now of trying to work with somebody else that's going to help us nail that bit. Thank you very much.
All right, Hong, over to you.
Hello, Kirsty. I run a social enterprise called Mr. Kick. We fill the gaps of a traditional one-to-one reactive psychotherapy through an emotional vaccination initiative. And so far, we have very strong track records, and we are expanding into the NHS, local government, and the universities. I'm, I just don't have a background in marketing and sales. I find it really struggling because now, even though we have very strong track record, it's just I'm kind of still figure out how to make people aware about the impact work we have been doing. So my question, number one, is website one of the most important channel to make people aware about our work? And if so, if I have budget, we need to improve the website. The second question here is that because each time when I go to talk with different potential customers, I will have to kind of refine my pitch and pitch deck, etc. And also depending on which target audiences I'm going to talk to, I have to refine everything. So if I have budget, maybe it's better to hire specialists, maybe a marketing specialist, a branding specialist to do all the work. Is that right? Because now I just got so many tasks I got to focus on, and branding and marketing and expanding and services, etc. So what's the best approach?
I think it depends on your budget. So you're not alone in your challenge because I think with tech being the kind of core of everything we do, most of the people we work with are really, really clever techies, and they're not marketers. They've never had to do a marketing strategy. So, but in terms of the first question about whether you should build out your website, I think with something like what you're doing, I think it's always really good to have case studies. So if you're working up your case studies, make sure that just to be really clear what I mean by case study, this is not a testimonial from a client, but it's kind of like, you're saying you're starting to work with the NHS or particular trusts, etc. Go in and work out like what was their big challenge and create the case study that talks about the challenge, talks a little bit about the solution, but then also talks about that outcome. And then using that in your marketing is really valuable because people can kind of see that, it's almost like reflecting a mirror up to people. So if they're having that same challenge, they can read that case study, and that's a really good kind of marketing technique. The other thing that you might want to think about doing is creating some of your own data. So again, it's kind of very budget dependent, but this is a really good PR tactic that we use quite a lot for startups that are, they've got a little bit of traction. They may be doing their first pilots, but they need something that kind of helps them get something that's unique. And we can do that through either consumer or B2B. Survey or research. It's not massive. You don't need to spend a huge amount of money. I think at the moment it's around £350 a question to ask 2,000 consumers their opinion on something. So that is an option for you to get some data that might really help with some of your marketing, that helps you, if you're talking to journalists, you might have something, you might be able to find a really unique stat or something that will help you get a journalist really interested. And then on the question that you had about whether you hire somebody, Hong, I think it really depends on the team that you have. It could be that actually just getting a little bit of time with an expert to help you define the strategy. And then maybe the strategy is to bring in an intern or somebody junior to help you execute that strategy. And I should have said this earlier, actually, with regards to the founder brand things. one of the things that we do talk about is that founders, work with somebody senior to help them determine what their voice is and what they should be saying, but then work with people on your team that can help you as the founder, can almost empower you. So having a 15-minute conversation with someone that can help you write some posts, but it's your opinion, it's your viewpoints, but someone asking you those questions and then actually helping you write some content so that they do some of that legwork for you could be a really good strategy. So I'm really happy, Hong, to have a chat with you afterwards about what I would recommend to do, because it's difficult when I need to almost have a look at your business to say, like, what would you do in your situation. But I think, yeah, think about getting yourself some unique data if you can. You don't need 20 questions. You can do quite a lot with 3 questions if they're really tactical. And then maybe work with somebody a bit senior on your strategy, and then you can determine whether you need the resource to help you execute it.
Thank you. I will connect with you on LinkedIn. We'll have a chat. Will that be okay?
Yeah, we can take a chat. That I'm happy to help where I can.
I'm going to
Thank you very
take a quick question from the chat, and then Dip will go to you. Oh, actually, Nigella, I was going to ask you a question in the chat, but I'll go to you once. I'll have you ask it live if that's okay. Dib, I'll go to you first, and then Nigella, I'll skip your question in the chat and have you ask it live later.
Thanks, and thanks, Kirsty, for this being very insightful so far. My name is Dave. I am a founder at Wellens. We are a productivity and an HR tech. Our target people are on the buyer side would be HR and exec in small and medium companies, like from 200 to 1,000, but also users, managers themselves. So I'm thinking of how do I create the split persona who talks about at the enterprise level to HR and execs, but also at an empathetic level to the managers who are going to be using the product, and use the same channel, which is LinkedIn.
Yeah. So I don't know how much. First of all, you're thinking in the right way. So to think about the sort of kind of dual element of the messaging. If you've got 2 customers, then you do need to have kind of 2 strands of communication strategy. I suspect it will be easier for you to, if you're talking to the HR managers, because you're having those sales conversations, it'll be easier for you to define what you should say to those because you're hearing it from them. And one of the good rule of thumbs that we typically will say is, like, if you're hearing the same thing back on the challenges that they're having, then that's a really good indicator for you that should form the narrative that you need to be putting into your content and your comms strategy. So if you're hearing, like, I'm really struggling to get people engaged in the workplace and I can't get buy-in from the business, then you could create something like, this is what we're hearing from all of our customers, that this is a big challenge. Does anyone else have a challenge like this? Because actually we're really interested in finding out more. Or you could create a panel, or a sort of maybe an intimate breakfast event or something like that kind of gives you, again, the opportunity to hear as much as possible, but then it's something that you can then look at distilling the insight and then giving it back to customers. On the end user side, so the managers themselves, it will depend, I suppose, on how much contact you have with those, but maybe start thinking about whether you could do some user research or something or some kind of a listening exercise that allows you to sort of understand that, what keeps those people up at night, so that it will help you then differentiate your messaging for them. People, I do genuinely think that people want to listen to other people that are talking about the problems that they have and offering potential solutions to those problems, or at least that kind of empathy that people understand. So out of the 2 of them, if you find that those end users, you need to perhaps know a little bit more about them so that you can become a true expert, then maybe that's the piece of work that you could do. It doesn't have to be lots. Maybe you could have like 20, just have conversations with 20 of them. But I do think that would be really valuable for the business.
Yeah. Would it be okay? Sorry, not to take too much time. Would it be okay if I post my company account that is going to the HR and exec, and I repost, but that's not my voice. My voice is for the managers because I really want to connect with them.
Yeah.
And usually managers hate the HR half of the time. So I want to find the right message that kind of works.
Yeah,
Um,
you've got to find that gap in between the two, haven't you?
yeah.
And I think I mean that it's doable. You can definitely do it, but you're going to have to. I think
Mm,
that's why that messaging framework is like where
mm,
is the middle ground between those two, and then
yeah.
that's the area that you play in.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that I might ask for everybody's help would be that thing you just said, which is having intimate breakfast. I tried it, it didn't work out. I need to find out what the like best thing, because it is really interesting when you can bring people
Yeah,
together.
panel discussions or things like that work.
Panel discussion.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the other thing is if you, again, without knowing what you did with the breakfast, but I've seen
Mm,
people do breakfast where they're going to release some research into the world. So if it's like brand new and you're offering them something totally unique at that breakfast, so again, you're not selling to them as such, but you're there to give them some unique snapshot of their industry. That can work really well. And also, especially if you perhaps got like complementary people together. So maybe maybe you could try doing that kind of you know, partners or network people that are
mm.
complementary to your service offering, and then it becomes something that's not just you, but a kind of very well balanced and 360 insight
Good
approach.
idea. Good idea. Yeah. Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but I'll shut up here.
We'll get to Nichelle, and then if we have time, Deb, I'll go back to you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank
Yeah.
you for the informative session so far, Kirsty. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about using generative AI wisely amongst sort of the content that's created to communicate messages. So I've got a background in video production and photography, so I'm very strong on the visual side of things. And like everybody else on the panel, we know how effective generative AI can be working in certain areas when you are prompting correctly. I'm pretty confident that I can get a custom avatar created of my likeness. And I'm thinking about, because the thing about being on different platforms and targeting different groups of people with different communication, I can't always be the person that's giving that presentation, but I can type up the copy for that presentation, targeting those different audiences, and I can my plan is to feed that copy through a system where my avatar would then be presenting it. Of course, it won't be exactly like me, and I think people will be able to tell it's an avatar, but that's okay because I'm going to call it an avatar. I'm going to give it a nickname, so it's going to be my assistant. I'm going to be very transparent about that. So I suppose my question here is, so I'm being transparent. I want, and the information that I'll be providing, it's not salesy. It's, I work in copyright, rights management. It's a hugely controversial area at the moment. There's a lot of discussion about changing copyright law in the UK. There's a lot of information, really useful things that I could be providing to people. And that's what I'm going to be using my avatar for. So I'm looking for more hints and tips. It's a very new area of building relationships using an avatar. And to give you sort of some context, the sort of model that I've been looking at is there are brand agencies that create avatars, and it's like a controllable asset for them. So something along those lines. Any thoughts?
I'm going to be really honest. This is not something I have had a huge amount of experience in. However, I think I still think you need as an individual, if with even with all of the avatar things, which I actually think is really interesting because you're talking about kind of community building using your avatar. So you're kind of cloning yourself to do all the stuff that is the useful, the advice driven stuff.
Yeah.
I think the thing I would say for you as a founder, though, you have to remember that people do still want to see the human in charge of the business. So maybe your messaging strategy should be around, you as a leader, you as a kind of, with the business growth sides of things, the things that actually talk about the success. Is it tick box? Because I've got your
Yes. Yeah, that's us.
the success of Tickbox, things that, you know, make you somebody that's great to work with. Maybe you could do something as a woman in tech. You know, there's things that make you come across. If you're going to have a very heavily AI driven business, I think the kind of rule of thumb is that you still need to balance that with some human element, in my opinion. I don't know what anyone else thinks about this, but that's and because you talk about building relationships. I think what will happen is that your avatar will be brilliant at kind of getting that engagement and probably pushing the brand awareness. Whether that tactic will build you relationships, I don't know. I suspect that will come from your human interaction.
I think I might do a mixed model. So one of the things that we do at Tickbox is label when something's authentic and when it's synthetic.
Yeah.
And I would be actually demoing my own products by showing the label. Okay, this is synthetic Nagila. I'm going to call her Neo Gila, and this is real Nagila. And sometimes, so I could keep my personality basically. So people will always know when it's a real Nagila talking. This is what I've imagined. I'll keep everybody posted on how far I get with this. In my mind, it looks amazing. When I post it on LinkedIn, everybody else can let me know.
The other thing I will talk, when you're talking about building in authority, if you do want to do some PR later on down the line, you really can't use generative AI to create content. So what we've had a few issues with our agency at the moment, in that we've had to now put into our contract that clients have to let us know if they've created content using AI. And also they have to be really transparent with us, because what's happening is that editors are putting everything through an AI tracker. And if it comes back as a high percentage of AI generated, they reject it. So all of that hard work that you've put into it will just get rejected immediately. So actually, you know, if you are looking at doing PR, remember that journalists are going to be looking at your profile. And if it looks like you are a bot, which ultimately, if all your content's coming from AI, then you may fall into some challenges with that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Kat, can I call on you to share a little bit about your press release experience? I just saw your comment in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Hi, Kirsty. I really enjoyed your talk very much. So my name is Katrine Kat. So we built a agentic branding platform. And what I particularly liked about what you said was the messaging pillars and the content themes and stuff, because we obviously automate that with AI, because that takes founders a long time. So I tried not to comment because I didn't want to, like, you know, say, I don't know, it was your chance to speak. So, but just on the press release for my fundraise with which was led by SS Capital, I wrote my press release with my own AI model, and we got exposure in at least like 7 publications. But I did say at the end of the press release, this press release was written by AI Cat, and it literally took 3 minutes to write, and I've successfully used AI.
Yeah, I think AI is fine with press releases. I think where the problem comes is if a journalist or an editor has asked you to write an article about a specific subject and you've used AI to do that, they are rejecting that because they want to hear a human's opinion. They don't want the regurgitation of everything that's out there in the world. They want to know your viewpoint, your standpoint. They want your expertise. And that's why they're putting everything through these AI trackers at the moment, which is a challenge. I don't know if we've lost Kat. Have we?
I think Kat may have frozen. But I have actually a last question on that topic, which if Kat rejoins us, it'd be good to hear what she put in this message too. But what my last question for you, Kirsty, is in that outreach message to journalists, if you want to try to get your fundraise covered in a press outreach or a particular story, product launch, in that message to editors, what should you include?
Well, really, it's kind of your new, although your news is really important to you, what an editor will really care about is what this means for their readers. So if it's a startup publication, it's important. It's a great milestone moment where it's a business that's raised, but really what they want is they want to know, what is the challenge that you're solving? What is your business going to do for its customers? What is the size of the market that you're either disrupting or that you're going to make some kind of impact on. And also, what validation do you have in the market? So have you been, have you got a partner? Have you, secured a great investor? Have you got already got pilots in with MasterCard or whoever it is that it might be working with? They want to know all of those kind of ways that validate you. Journalists are getting, from a press release perspective, especially from funding announcements, they're getting hundreds and hundreds of those every single day. So your news does need to kind of work quite hard to cut through. So rather than having perhaps a headline which is, hotbed raises 2 million, it might be something like, £2 million raised to kickstart the tech community or something like that. You can see how you're starting to lead with the challenge over actually your news. You've almost got to kind of be quite realistic, I think, about where your news sits in the wider world, and that's how you should position yourself.
Makes sense. Perfect. I like that headline. I hope we have that headline one day.
Yeah, me too.
We're going to wrap this session now and start Eva's session in just a second. But Kirsty, thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to having you at Founders Camp on Friday too. So founders, if you want to hear more of Kirsty's wisdom and you're attending on Friday for Founders Camp, then great. And we'll say goodbye to you for now. We'll share your LinkedIn in the email that founders will receive later today with the recording. And is there any last minute things you want to share or where else people can find you?
No, I don't think so, but thank you. It's been really great. The questions have been really interesting and put me on the spot this morning. That's good for a Tuesday that thinks it's a Monday. So it's really lovely to meet you all, and thanks for the time.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Amanda, for helping us put this together. All right. We'll say goodbye to you now. And thanks again. And Eva.